fraternize with the enemy, and you just may find yourself in U.S. custody of 6 feet under. U.S. President Obama is continuing a Bush policy that allows troops to capture, even kill Americans abroad. They see it as a national threat, those suspects, and Matthew Sharow with Iraq Veterans Against the War joins us now live from New York. Thank you so much for joining us. So does this give the president and executive branch virtually unchecked ability to assassinate U.S. citizens? And how can the president have that authority with no judicial process?
Well, I don't think it's necessarily a new issue or something that Obama has just started. I've read about how this was a policy under Bush as well, and as we've seen in so many other ways, Obama's unfortunately choosing to continue on with what at least we in Iraq Veterans Against the War consider to be war crimes.
Do you think that maybe this is necessary, though? This is part of the counter-terror strategy, and that in the kind of war that the U.S. is fighting, these kind of extrajudicial processes are unavoidable?
Well, considering the nature of the kind of war the U.S. is fighting, yes. The U.S. war on terror itself is taking place in an extra-legal realm. So it doesn't surprise me that they would need to seek extra-legal means for carrying that out. Now, I think the real question is, what does this mean for Americans, specifically Americans who are involved in nonviolently resisting the U.S. government and the crimes that they're perpetrating on the peoples and the countries that we're occupying? So I guess the question is, what does this mean for resistance in general? And is this going to in any way be used to target otherwise nonviolent opposition to the U.S. government?
Are you concerned that that is what this means? Have you ever seen any evidence of that?
Well, see, that's the thing. I kind of feel like in the U.S., one of the things you can do whenever you want is go to jail. So myself, I typically dedicate myself to being a nonviolent activist, and I participate in a lot of civil disobedience as well as the other members of my organization. So in doing that, very oftentimes we run right up against the cops, and regularly, the police, state actors behave very well. And other times there's a lot of very questionable things that go on, certainly in custody. Yeah, I think what we need to address is a broader culture that exists within the armed sort of wing of the U.S. government, being the military and the police force, that they somehow have a unilateral right to act in any way they deem necessary, as long as somebody in a position of authority is telling them it's to fight terrorism or somehow reduce terror.
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time,
when these things,
Mr. Throw. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you so much for giving us your opinion on this news that President Obama has continued a Bush policy allowing him to virtually assassinate a U.S. citizen abroad who is believed to be involved in terrorist activities. Welcome back. The new U.S. target in fighting terrorists, its own citizens. Well, the top intelligence officer for the Obama administration is saying that's the case if citizens abroad are believed to be involved with terrorist groups. Here to talk about it with me now is author and blogger David Swanson. Now, Mr. Swanson, you've been very critical of this policy. Why don't you explain why?
Well, it's illegal. In addition to being immoral, it's illegal in a number of ways. And the difference that has struck Americans is that we're targeting Americans abroad for assassination. But our routine targeting of non-Americans abroad for assassination is just as illegal. So if this highlights that more widespread crime and draws attention to it, that could be a good thing. There's also the problem of having someone who works in so-called intelligence gathering involved not just in a program of assassinating people, but involved in coming into the Congress, to the first branch of our government, and telling them what will be the law and what will not be the law, and Congress having to find out from him what is now considered legal, which is to turn our system of government within Washington on its head.
Well, let's just talk about first the issue of the conflicts that we're in the Middle East. And I know you're talking about non-citizens, but let's stick to American citizens. Isn't it fair that if there is a terrorist suspect who's, say, in Yemen, who's an American citizen, but he's plotting to attack the U.S., why should he be exempt from being a target just because he's a U.S. citizen? Why shouldn't the rules of war apply?
Because it's not a war. It's outside of a war, and there's no battlefield there. We're talking about people who are explicitly not combatants, not engaged in a war on a battlefield. If China were to come into the United States and assassinate a Chinese citizen and say, well, we were at war with that individual, the United States would consider that a violation of our sovereignty and an act of murder. And the government of Yemen would have every right to do the same. We do not have the right, as the government of the United States, to go into somebody else's nation and commit many of the sorts of acts we do, from kidnapping to imprisonment to torture to now assassination, not just of non-Americans, but of Americans as well. It's absolutely illegal.
But isn't this necessary as part of the counter-terror strategy? And you could argue it requires these different extrajudicial measures. I mean, look at Guantanamo Bay. The president wanted to close it. He issued that executive order, but he hasn't been able to. It's been a lot trickier.
Well, he isn't willing to close it in a serious sense, that is, to put on trial those accused of crimes, try them and convict them and imprison them lawfully, or set them free. Those are the options you have under a legal system of government. And the fact that we are straying from that and imprisoning people outside any rule of law is a lot of what is motivating hostility against the United States abroad. So to argue that we have to take stronger measures and go and recklessly assassinate more people in more nations with the collateral damage of murdering people who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, that's necessary to combat terrorism, is to turn the facts on their head. We are increasing hostility against our country by what we're doing, including by what we're doing at Guantanamo, including if we move Guantanamo to Illinois, which is not an improvement.
You mentioned the word recklessly, and now that top intelligence officer was really specific to say they're going to do everything to not be reckless and to be really careful. Are you saying that you don't believe that that's possible?
Well, anything's possible, but we should not have to put our trust in an intelligence officer who operates in secret without oversight from our elected representatives and outside of any rule of law, and who could tomorrow change the law and say, well, this American came onto American soil and we were in hot pursuit, and it would make no sense not to have gone ahead and murdered him, so we did so. And now the law will be that we can do it on American soil too. I mean, there's no logical reason not to have that happen. If we're going to have restraints on our government, we're going to have them through our elected representatives in Congress, and not have an unelected official operating in secret coming in and dictating what the law shall be because he thinks it's necessary and he promises, contrary to decades of past performance, to be careful about it.
All right. Well, thank you, David Swanson, for giving us your insight on the continuation of a Bush policy that allows the president to decide if a U.S. terror suspect overseas can be assassinated. That's one of our own American citizens.